We are diving into a cavalry brigade that was founded on the bloodshed of Scottish rebellion going back over 300 years. Known as the Birdcatchers, they have seen action in defense of the crown since the mid 1600s. Let's take a look at the regimental history of the Scots Greys. Our story begins in 1678. Scotland was becoming embroiled in a dark period known as the Killing Times. Following the restoration of the monarchy in 1660, King Charles II rejected the Presbyterian system established during the Civil Wars and forced episcopacy on the Church of Scotland. The forced change caused massive unrest. In response to a massive unlawful assemblies and armed rebels, Tam Dalyell of the Binns raised 3 dragoon troops. An ex-mercenary and a fiercely loyal royalist, he was better known as Bloody Tam. These were the first mounted troops raised for the crown in Scotland. Their original task was to hunt down and break up Presbyterian gatherings operating as mounted infantry. They would rapidly traverse the rugged terrain of southwest Scotland. Those troops, along with their leader Tam, saw actions across Scotland. They would see engagements for 3 years. By 1681, King Charles issued a royal warrant to expand this force, creating the crown's first permanent cavalry regiment. The Killing Times came to an abrupt close with the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which toppled the Stuart monarch. Following William of Orange's ascent to the throne, the newly formed Royal Regiment of Scots Dragoons shifted focus to a new enemy, the Jacobites. On May 1st, 1690, the regiment executed a devastating surprise dawn attack on the Jacobite camp at Cromdale. Their decisive shock tactics routed the rebels effectively, ending the first Jacobite rising in Scotland. By 1702, the regiment was deployed to the continent to join the Grand Alliance against France, serving under the legendary Duke of Marlborough. Their role evolved from internal policing to heavy cavalry shock troops in Flanders. At the Battle of Belheim in 1704, they fought as pure mounted cavalry, supporting a massive decisive breakthrough that shattered the Franco-Bavarian army. Remarkably, despite heavy engagement, the regiment suffered no fatalities at Belheim, but their reputation was fully cemented 2 years later at the Battle of Ramillies in 1706. Under the command of Brigadier Lord John Hay, the Greys were ordered to charge into the chaotic collapse of the French right flank. They collided directly into the French household gendarmeries and the King's regiment. After fierce hand-to-hand combat, the Greys captured the French colors. For that feat, they were granted a unique honor, the privilege of dressing as grenadiers, wearing the distinctive mitre caps, a right held uniquely among the British cavalry regiments. Their final major engagement of the war was at the Battle of Marplaquet in 1709. The battle became an instant meat grinder. The moment Allied infantry cleared the French earthworks, the Scots Greys poured through the gap. They immediately collided with the Maison du Roi and the personal bodyguards of Louis XIV. Eyewitnesses described the brutal cavalry melee as chaotic and terrifying. It was here the famous cry went up from the French ranks.
Ces terribles chevaux gris, comme ils travaillent.
During the slaughter, Private John Cockburn seized the enemy standard. The Scots Greys now possessed 2 captured French standards, officially solidifying their transition from dragoons to an elite heavy cavalry shock force. To understand the sheer terror the Scots Greys inflicted during these 18th century continental wars, we have to look at how their weapons and tactics evolved. Originally raised as dragoons, these men were technically mounted infantry. Their primary weapon wasn't a sword, but a short-barreled flintlock carbine, or pistol. They were designed to ride quickly to a strategic point, dismount, and fire in line formations. However, as they transitioned into heavy cavalry, their doctrine entirely shifted. The firearm became a secondary weapon used for mostly skirmishing or signaling. The true weapon became the physics of the charge itself. Scots Greys were mounted on massive, powerful horses selected specifically for their weight and stamina rather than just speed. When conducting a heavy charge, they operated under strict shock tactics. The men would form up knee to knee, creating a literal wall of muscle and steel.
First of all, you would reach across, grasp the hilt of the sword, draw it from the scabbard, hold it overhead, and then drop it down to point at any enemy that might approach.
Following a brief return to Scotland to crush the 1715 Jacobite rising at Sheriffmuir, the Greys returned to continental Europe for the War of Austrian Succession, utilizing these brutal shock tactics to great effect. They started with a bang at the Battle of Dettingen in 1743. collapsing the French left flank and netting their regiment yet another captured standard. But their fearless tactics came at a heavy cost. At Fontenoy in 1747, they lost their commanding officer, Colonel James Campbell, to French grape shot. Later that year, they endured their worst defeat yet. At the Battle of Laufield, the Allied center had collapsed, leaving the British infantry totally exposed. To buy time for the infantry to escape, General Sir John Ligonier led a desperate suicidal charge with only 18 squadrons left, including the Scots Greys. They plunged headlong into a massive body of unshaken French infantry. The Scots Greys lost 158 men, roughly 40% of their strength. After the battle, the Scots Greys were immediately reinforced and rebuilt to continue service by taking in drafts of new recruits from Scotland and transfers from other units to fill the gaps. By 1748, the Treaty of Aachen was signed, bringing the War of Austrian Succession to an end. In reality, this solved almost nothing and just reset the status quo. The Scots Greys returned to Great Britain for home service until they were needed by the Crown once more. The Scots Greys were called to the continent once more to face the returning Napoleon Bonaparte. At the Battle of Waterloo, the Greys were part of the Union Brigade, positioned on the reserve slope of the ridge at Mont Saint Jean. As Napoleon's force threatened to break the Allied center left, the Scots Greys passed through the ranks of the 92nd Highlanders at a fast walk. Before exploding into a gallop, they smashed into the flank and rear of the 45th Infantry Regiment, shattering their lines. During the melee, the courageous Sergeant Charles Ewart, a powerfully built 6'4" veteran, spotted the standard bearer of the 45th and fought his way through the chaos to secure the Imperial Eagle. Ewart's own account highlights the absolute savagery of the engagement.
The enemy and I had a hard contest for it. He thrust for my groin. I parried it off and I cut him through the head, after which I was attacked by one of their lancers. I cut him from the chin upwards through his teeth. Next, I was attacked by a foot soldier with his bayonet, but I parried him and I cut him down through the head, so that I finished the contest for the Eagle.
Ewart carried the standard to the rear, presenting the Eagle directly to the Duke of Wellington. He became a national hero overnight, and was given a highly rare battlefield commission to the rank of ensign. But Ewart's individual ferocity was ultimately a reflection of the unbreakable spirit of the Scots Greys as a whole. Men who would fight through hellfire, bayonets, and sabers for the honor of the regiment. While Ewart secured glory, the rest of the Scots Greys lost their minds in the thrill of combat. Lacking orders to halt, they surged past the broken French infantry columns. Charging down the slope into the valley floor, they sabered French gunners and spiked cannons, but their horses were utterly exhausted, and they found themselves scattered far ahead of their supporting infantry. Seeing the vulnerability, the French unleashed a devastating countercharge of armored cuirassiers and lancers. Unable to reform, the Greys were slaughtered, fighting a desperate retreat back up the muddy slope. Of the roughly 450 men who started the attack, 104 were killed and 97 wounded, alongside the loss of 228 horses. It was a staggering 44% casualty rate. Yet, those who could still fight reformed on the ridge, mounting 2 more small-scale charges before the battle ended. After Waterloo, the Scots Greys would continue their already lengthy service to the Crown. They would serve in more conflicts around the world, continuing to receive various battle honors for actions, such as covering the British Expeditionary Force withdrawal from Mons in World War I, or breaking the siege of Kimberley during the Second Boer War. Most notably was their action in the Crimean War, earning 2 Victoria Crosses for the unit. Taking part in the Battle of Balaclava, the Scots Greys were a part of the Heavy Brigade and ended up conducting an uphill charge against a larger Russian force. The Victoria Crosses earned that day Regimental Sergeant Major John Grieve for rescuing Captain Nugent, the regiment's second-in-command, who was surrounded by Russian cavalry, charging into the melee and fighting off the attackers, pulling the wounded captain to safety. He was presented his Victoria Cross by Queen Victoria in 1857, and is believed to be the first soldier in the British Army to receive the medal. The second Victoria Cross was earned by Private Henry Ramage, who conducted 3 acts during the charge, galloping to aid a fellow dragoon who was surrounded by 7 Russian soldiers, dispersing them and saving his comrade's life. Second, capturing a Russian soldier from enemy lines while the Heavy Brigade was covering the retreat of the decimated Light Brigade. And lastly, he rescued a badly wounded private, lifting him onto his horse and carrying him to the rear under heavy crossfire. As the times continued to change and adjust, the regiment would continuously petition to keep the use of their gray horses. and these petitions lasted until about 1941. Stationed in Palestine, they were finally ordered to transition to tanks. The race was held in Ramey, Palestine in 1941.
I didn't want to lose the horses. I hated the thought of having to travel in a motor vehicle of any sort, because lots of the chaps, including myself, had never driven a motor vehicle in their lives.
By September of 1941, the regiment received its first armored vehicles, M2 Stuart tanks. The transition to tanks would not change the prowess of the Scots Greys, as they would go through World War II, earning 20 battle honors across 3 continents. After World War II, they would take part in occupying Germany until 1952. They would be called to Libya for 3 years, joining the 25th Armored Brigade during a period of heightened tension in North Africa, before returning to Britain for training. They would then head to Cyprus and Northern Ireland between 1969 and 1971. They would serve as peacekeeping duties in both locations, and these would be the last actions as an independent unit. On July 2, 1971, at Holy Rod Palace in Edinburgh, the Royal Scots Greys amalgamated with the 3rd Carabiners. This merger created the Royal Scots Dragoons Guard, inheriting the battle honors and traditions of both predecessors, and becoming the senior Scottish Cavalry Regiment and the oldest surviving regiment of the line in the British Army. The Royal Scots Dragoons Guard currently operate as Scotland's light cavalry. They no longer have main battle tanks and instead specialize in long-range reconnaissance using highly mobile wheeled vehicles. They have primarily turned into the eyes and ears of the 51st Infantry Brigade. While the Greymounts may be long gone, the regiment maintains its historic connections to the Royal Scots Greys by keeping a mounted troop of grey horses, strictly used for ceremonial duties in Scotland, preserving the legacy, and the last unit to give up their horses in 1941. Almost 300 years of service before amalgamating in 1971, the Scots Greys started as 3 dragoon troops raised to quell religious unrest and eventually turned into one of the most decorated and well-known British cavalry units. Through their time, they've gathered 39 specific battle honors, plus 3 beater honors. 4 Victoria Crosses were earned by those serving in the regiment: Regimental Sergeant Major John Grieve, Private Henry Ramage, Lieutenant James Leith, and Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Keyes. 35 Distinguished Service Orders from the Second Boer War to World War II, 80 military crosses between World War I and II, 60 Distinguished Conduct Medals, 3 Enemy Standards, and 1 Napoleonic Eagle, giving them the nickname the Birdcatchers, still on display at the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh. Though the grey horses and their cavalry charges may be long gone, the successor regiment carries forward the same ethos of vigilance and elite service. The Royal Scots Greys may have amalgamated, but their distinguished record remains a golden thread in the fabric of British military history, honoring a lineage of soldiers who served with unmatched distinction from the fields of Belheim to the deserts of Iraq.